Within a short 3 years, the economic freedom fighters have become a very influential political force in the country that goes beyond party politics. In their first year in parliament, they promised to make President Zuma pay part of the money for Nkandla, and that has already happened. Earlier this year, they targeted the Gupta family, who this past week said that they will be leaving South Africa and selling off their interests in different businesses. And in the recent local government elections, they determined the governments of Tshwane and Joburg. So what gives the EFF such muscle, and what are their views about the developments around Minister of Finance Pravin Gordhan? I'm with the chairperson of the EFF Advocate Dali Mpofu. Pleasure to have you with us, Advocate.
Thank you, Tim.
Well, let me go back to something that happened last week before I talk about a whole number of things. You were at the funeral of the Reverend Stoffile, and thousands of people packed that auditorium at Fort Hare University. He took everybody by surprise, Sipho Pichana, it appears. What happened? Did you expect that from him?
Well, I didn't expect it from him, but I can say that we were expecting it to happen generally.
Yes.
Because our view was always that on the issue specifically that he addressed of the removal of Zuma, having failed ourselves to impress this upon the top leadership after their 4-day meeting where they came up with nothing, we realized that if it was going to happen that Zuma gets removed, it would now be coming from the bottom. In other words, from the structures themselves. But as to where the spark would be lit, we certainly didn't expect it to come in the way it did. We thought maybe one of the provinces or one of the branches would come up with something like this. But Mr. Pichana did it in a spectacular fashion.
Well, and of course, you know, it was seen all over the place. It was on social media and so on, and people commenting. But the ANC, through the Secretary General, responded in time and said that he's not a structure. So what did you think of that response?
Well, that's a typical Gwedeism, you know. The point of the matter is that Sipho Pichana is not just anybody. He's a senior cadre of the movement, a senior person from the exile ranks. He's been a DG in 2 important departments, starting with the Mandela era up to the Mbeki era. So the reaction, I think, there was from Mbalula and Ramaphosa at least, was that they had heard what he had said. And Gwede, I think, before he came up with that gem that Pichana is not a structure, had acknowledged that the issues that he had raised were important.
Now, there seems to be a lot of things happening within the ANC at the moment. I want to talk about the EFF in particular, but I know you've been talking to what's going on within the ANC, so you'd still be the right person to talk about. What's going on? I mean, the Deputy Secretary General around the Pravin Gordhan matter says something, the Secretary General Gwede Mantashe says something, one minister says this, the other says this. Maybe let me take a step back. What's happening around Pravin Gordhan, the Minister of Finance?
Well, it's part of the same confusion. I think that the ANC is punch drunk. I think what happened to them on the 3rd of August is something that they didn't expect at all. I think they thought maybe they won't do as well as they had done before, but they never thought that 4 metros would be hung as they were, and they had stood a good chance of losing them. Part of what's happening with Gordhan is what was clearly postponed just for the elections, which was to go for him and on a witch hunt and to ensure that a Lekki is put in the treasury. Remember that it became clear last year with the Nenegate, so-called Nenegate saga, that the practitioners of state capture were no longer prepared to go through the difficult route of having to tender and so on. They just wanted to capture the treasury itself directly. And so I think it's part of that project.
But one would have thought that, you know, the dismissal of the former Minister Nhlanhla Nene taught everybody concerned a lesson, and including those that have got nothing to do with wielding power in the country. We all suddenly learned something about these things, that they should not be done in a certain way when there were losses on the stock exchange, particularly with funds and insurance policies, life insurance and that sort of thing. So it touched a lot of people. One would think that you learn from those experiences.
Yeah, but if you've put a guy like Nklameza who had the Hawks, and you tell him that, look, let's wait until the elections and then we go for this guy. Maybe somebody forgot to call him and say, look, we've now lost metros and there's a new dynamic. So you are still acting on the old mandate. But it's part of the general confusion, as you correctly point out. I mean, in the past 4 or 5 days, you get Minister Blade Nzimande condemning Zuma, and then you get Minister Van Rooyen condemning Minister Gordhan, and then you get Gwede condemning MKMVA. It's just crazy. I think that they're not used to being put under this amount of public pressure. I think what the electorate did in August, the month of August 2016 will go down as a major turning point. We will look back in history and realize this is when the people said enough is enough and really took the power into their hands where it belongs.
The EFF, after the outcome of the 3rd of August elections, said it was going to watch the space. You took time out before you could pronounce on which party you were going to go with, and that you were talking to different parties. What made you finally decide to go with the DA where it could form government instead of the ANC? What exactly happened and what informed that approach on your side?
Yeah, well, firstly, we never went with the DA. We didn't go with anybody. Our approach was quite simple. We expressed it at the Results Center, I think on the 4th or 5th of August. We said, as far as we're concerned, the elections are over. We're not looking for any coalitions. Anybody who's looking for coalitions can come and talk to us. And indeed, we were approached by both the ANC and the DA, and we had separate talks with both of them. And we gave them preconditions as to, because you see, negotiations are give and take. So we said to them, you want 11% of our votes, we can give it to you. We don't want anything, we don't want any positions, but there must be some give and take. So you must give something. So for each grouping, we gave what the preconditions were. They both failed to meet those preconditions, and that is why we decided that we could not sign a coalition agreement with either the DA or the ANC. What we then did was to say, we will then vote with the opposition parties. Whether the opposition party in a particular municipality was the IFP, or as happened in KZN, or Forum for Service Delivery in Northwest, or the DA in most of the metros, it was just a coincidence. The point is that we were going to vote against the ANC with any opposition party that had a chance of taking over the mayorships, since we did not want to take any mayorships.
But what informed that position that you are going to go against the ANC?
Well, it was a logical one, Tim. We interpreted the election as having been a rejection of the ANC, and more particularly a rejection of Jacob Zuma's corruption. So if we had then gone and propped up the ANC that had just been rejected by the voters to go back to power, that would have been a ridiculous stance, because we would then have been saying to the electorate, no, you were wrong in rejecting these people. No, you were wrong, they're not corrupt. No, we were wrong as well in saying they must be removed, and therefore we want to bring them back through the back door. So that was something which, if we had to do any deal with the ANC, it would have been if they removed Zuma, for example, in other words, in recognition of what the electorate was saying.
Now, let's look at it from the point of view of ANC in Gauteng. They probably argued with you and said, you know, we are different, a bunch of people compared to the ones you are talking about, or specifically about the president, that we have our own reservations and so on. Please come with us. Then what was your position in that regard?
Well, that's interesting. Actually, you're quite right. The talks actually started, I don't know if people know that the talks actually started with the Gauteng ANC, because after we made the call, they were the first ones to call us. But our approach to them was exactly that, to say, look, guys, we can't negotiate anything with you. We agree with you. You want Zuma to go, we want Zuma to go. So bring your national leaders so that we can see if they can listen to the call. So unfortunately, they couldn't. And as you heard, the NEC statement was that they take collective responsibility. That's why we then said, well, anyone who's associated with Zuma's ANC, we can't have any deal with Zuma's ANC. So if they are so loyal as to stick around in Zuma's ANC, then they must suffer the consequences. So people like Pax Tau who are widely regarded as having done a fairly decent job in Joburg, suffered and were removed merely because they decided to side with Zuma. And the ANC itself lost the metros because they chose Zuma over those metros.
The developments now around Pravin God, and I want to go back to that because they speak to some of these things. What does it tell you about the way government operates and is being run, notwithstanding the demand on your part as the EFF that ANC should do something? I mean, ANC has been in power for 22, in charge of the country for more than 22 years. Again, I'm one of those that believe that experience should teach you something, you know, and as you observe and as you formulate new ways of thinking, you always strategize and re-strategize, right? And when experience shows you that your approach is wrong, then you find another way.
Well, you do, Tim, but the problem is you can't swim against the tide of history. You know, history shows us that so-called liberation movements die this way. They die by firstly losing the urban centers, and then they become rural parties. And then after that, it's lights out. Secondly, the methods that they use in that process of death vary from, you know, normal propaganda, using the media, capturing the broadcaster, and all sorts of kind of subtle ways. But once the game is up, then they turn to repression, which is what is happening now. What is being done to Pravin is just a sign of that. What was done in Parliament in assaulting some of our people is part of that. And some of us might end up in jail and all sorts of things like that before it gets better. So, you know, this is how it's going to be. The ANC is dead. There's no such thing as the ANC. It's simply an idea that we all have that remains in our heads because it was a strong brand. But the contradictions that are there within the leadership and the structures are actually irreconcilable. It's just going to die a natural death. It's a question of how long it's going to take.
If you were to give advice then, and I want to go back to the Pravin matter, much as we're talking about a person, but it talks to the bigger issue of the economy, which is now at 0% growth. And one asset fund yesterday is saying that it's not going to extend loans to state-owned agencies because they are concerned. And so on. You know, if you were to give advice then, or as a political observer and an active person in politics, what should happen now?
Well, they should go back to the drawing board. I think the mistake happened in 1994. When the ANC adopted what we call the neoliberal outlook economically, which really is just a nonsensical principle that says that you must just enrich a few people at the top and then the rest it will trickle down, you know, by the grace of God. I mean, that's nonsense. It's never going to happen in any country. Even in the US, people are beginning to question that kind of dogma. So that's what they need to do. The so-called NDP, which is supposed to be our grand vision, is premised on 5.4% growth. Now, if we're at 0% growth, it means that vision, so-called vision, will never be realized. So we don't have to wait for 2030 to know that it's not going to be realized. We should know now, because we're not going to get 5.4% growth, and change the course and ensure that inequality is tackled at the bottom, and ensure that the resources of the country are shared by the poor. You cannot have about 50 to 60% of the population being marginalized completely out of the economy and having no stake in it, because that's a recipe for chaos. And that's why we talk about massive state intervention. We talk about issues of nationalization and land distribution and so on, as methods which will intervene directly to ensure that the inherent inequalities which were caused by apartheid and colonialism are addressed.
Now, here's another point which happened this past week. The Guptas announced, the Gupta family, that they are leaving the country. How did you feel as EFF leadership when you heard their announcement? What do you make of that? Because there's a view that you are actually hounding a family of business people out of South Africa, and you need more such business people to grow the very economy that is in trouble?
Yeah, no, we are hounding the Guptas, but this is because we don't need more people who are going to buy, business through patronage, through giving so-called phantom shares to the president's son, and appointing ministers. Nochal, I mean that's not the kind of investment we need in South Africa, and the Guptas are a symptom of that. But we are cautious about. Obviously, we feel vindicated because we've been saying the Guptas must go. But the fact that they're selling some of their businesses needs itself to be scrutinized. Remember, one of the conditions we put to the ANC in the so-called coalition talks was that there should be a commission of inquiry on the Guptas. So now, for example, who are they selling to? Are they going to stay here? Are they still going to remain shareholders? Are those buyers, primed by them, and all sorts of things? So we need to check what that really means and entails. Yeah.
And in terms of the support you've given to the DA to form governments, in particularly Tshwane, Pretoria, and Joburg, how is the relationship like up to now? And is this going to last, given the fact that you're coming from opposite positions on a whole number of things, and it's still early days now?
No, there's no relationship whatsoever. That's exactly the whole point. If there was a relationship, we would have signed a coalition agreement which would govern the relationship for the next 5 years. We said we are voting with the opposition against the ANC to take away the arrogance of the ANC and to show them, to align ourselves with the people. So, but our stance is that we are going to be on the opposition benches in all those municipalities. Already, we've taken a stance now against Herman Mashaba's ludicrous suggestion that he's going to privatize Pikitup. And our councillors have said over our dead bodies, that's what we're going to do. We're going to engage robustly, as we are known for doing, in the opposition benches. And the best thing about the position we've taken is that we now have potential power to remove a mayor if he doesn't listen. We have potential power to ensure that the budgets are going to prioritize the poor. So we could have signed a deal and have a nice photo opportunity, but this way, for 5 years, every single day, we wield power to direct the resources of local government towards the poor.
Advocate Dali Mpofu, thank you very much for talking to us. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
That's the chairperson of the EFF, Advocate Dali Mpofu, talking to us about a whole number of issues, especially most recent events and their participation in the formation of governments, the situation, the developments in government. And, EFF becoming a force to reckon with. They make predictions. I couldn't get one from him today. I should have asked what the next move is on the part of the EFF. Thank you.
Everyone asked me for the lotto numbers.